Hey, good morning. How are we doing today? So we're going to get started, and thank you for coming. My name is Anthony Shepard, and I am the technical manager for OneWA Washington. And I really appreciate those of you who came in person today, and those of you who are on Skype, and those of you who are dialed in. This shows that there's a lot of enthusiasm for this program, specifically the technical specifications. And that's what we need from a program perspective. So thank you for your attendance today. So the purpose of today is this is a fairly short brief. It shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes, but it's really a dialogue with our customer in this case. One Washington is for you, is for the agencies in the state's users. And it's really to provide you a review of the process today that we took, the approach, and refining the technical specifications. I want to talk about a little bit today of where we started at, why we took that the approach we took, where we're at today, and then solicit you for your feedback, your comments, and then moving forward, what the help we'll need from you. So this is a dialogue. I really we're going to have a point at the end to ask questions, but please feel free during the presentation to ask questions. While I'd love to talk techie, and I'd love to go down those rabbit holes, this is not the time to do it. So we have to do that offline. This is more of a higher level briefing. I want to take just a second to introduce the team on the technical side first. We have Vonnie Talon here in the front. We have John Paul right there. We have Valorie Jones over there. Ken Adams also. And then just from the One Washington program supporting us, we have Liz Hoxett there. We have John Wright up here. We have Trin and Brian Richardson over there, who are part of the work stream. So again, thank you for supporting us. And hopefully we have Matt Stevens should be online from OCS. If not, we'll find Matt. He's from OCS. He's our honest broker during this review process. So the agenda, again, we're going to take a look at the goals here. We're going to explain why these are our goals, what's most important about those goals. Again, it's about the approach. You'll see that the goals support really the approach we took, at least for this initial review process. The timeline from when we started this review all the way up to I would take you through really when we start the RFP process, and then I'll get into a little bit of details on how we wrote the technical specifications. The final will be ready to look at 3 reference architectures and the purpose of those, and then followed up with questions. So when we get to questions, if you were in person, just raise your hand. Please just tell me who you are, your agency, and what your question is. If you are on Skype, please, we have a moderator. You can type your questions at any time into the chat box, and then we'll get your question. You can ask your question. And then finally, people who are dialed in, there is a point at the end that we're going to ask for questions from you. So if you can hold till then, that'd be great. Yes, one question. Yeah, that's true. So the point was, for those of you out on Skype and dialed in, if there's a question in the room, we'll take the mobile mics around to those individuals, and they'll be able to ask their question.
This meeting is being recorded.
Let Sarah know.
To unmute yourself,
and bring a chair for Melanie.
Melanie, okay. So, oh, I have another chair.
Please, mute all mics. Thank you. So as I laid out, this is really a dialogue. So one of our big concerns with the program is, are we addressing the customer's needs? Are we taking your feedback? In our case, for technical specifications, CIOs are a big part of that, where you're going to shape where this program is going to go from technical specifications. If you're a technical expert in your field, whether it's network, cybersecurity, enterprise services, again, your feedback and what you can provide the program are extremely valuable. So this is a dialogue. This is your time to ask questions. While we're not going to go too deep into it, please ask questions about the approach to make sure that if we need an asthma check, that make sure let's correct now while it's early on before we move too much farther in the program. So when you look at technical goals that we look at, the technical specification goals, while there's many goals, there's really 2 goals we want you to focus on. And there's two words I want you to remember today. So if you've already fallen asleep on me, I want you to remember two words. This is what you take back to your agencies. Alignment and compliance. Again, alignment and compliance. Alignment and compatibility with the state's architecture, whether your services are provided by WATEC or you provide your own services, your agency provides your own services, or compliance with, in this case, the Office of Cybersecurity. And while that's really the governing policy for cyber for the executive branch, the ERP the rules that we will have to follow will have to be followed by all agencies, even if you're outside of the executive branch. And we'll get into that a little bit. But again, remember, alignment and compliance. That's the big two driving factors, and that'll explain a little, when we get into the approach here, that will explain why those are the two biggest goals. So I'll pause there just to see if there are any questions at this point. Okay, so let's take a look at the timeline. So where do we start with the refinement process of these technical specifications? We initially began with our strategic partner provided us a starter set of 400 technical specifications. Yes,
we have a question of what does it mean by state infrastructure, SDC agencies? Yes.
So when I say infrastructure, just think of what is the network, what are the enterprise services, what are all the IT components that allow you to log onto a computer? What are all the things that you probably don't see from a user's perspective that allow you to gain services, whether it's email, whether it's just how do you get to the internet? It's how you log into AFRS. You know, how do you do that? I'm calling that the infrastructure. It's a general term, but it's what enables you to use the IT services, if you will. Does that answer your question? Good. Okay, we'll have a follow-up. Okay, so again, how we started the refinement process. So our strategic partner provided us an initial set of 400 technical specifications. These technical specifications are very broad and vague on purpose. They were kind of compiled over the years with our partner, with them doing city, state, and county governments, so they thought would be applicable to us. But initially, we had to make these our own in the state. So the process or the approach we took to own these as a state, that we said, well, there's over 100 agencies out there. We could go and interview each agency during the initial review process, or the approach we decided to take just for time's sake for this first initial round of reviews we said, well, WATEC they provide about 90 services, both network and enterprise services, to about 90% of the users in the state. And at least for the executive side, the Office of Cybersecurity supports all users on the executive side. So we said, what is a quicker way to get after the first initial review, the initial refinement of the technical specifications? So we went with that approach, and we spent most of our time in interviews, about 2 months, with just those two agencies. In WATEC's case, if you will, we went to authentication personnel, we went to network services or network access SMEs, or we went to enterprise services. So we spent time interviewing them, feeling that we would cover the agencies that they supported by listening to them at really, what are the particular needs? What are the technical specs of how we support them? How do they authenticate? How do they do single sign-on? And that's the approach we took during this initial round of reviews. Then there was the next step was a senior leadership review process where we went to, again, it's back to azimuth check. It's feedback from senior leaders. We said, well, here's the approach. We have 560 some technical specifications at that point. We said, we have 10 categories. Are we on the right track? Please give us some feedback. And then we received that feedback, and we corrected a little bit at where we're going, looked at a little bit. Things like we didn't have a business continuity section to cover things like disaster recovery. So we added things like that into the technical specs. It had its own individual category now. So those are the things we received from that. And then we're at the point we are today. So before I move forward, I know there's been some questions about that approach, and I just want to make sure that we address any concerns there are about taking that approach. Again, I said that's the initial round of reviews, so hint, hint, well, we have another one. But I just want to make sure there are any questions or concerns about that approach at this time. Go ahead on Skype.
Question from chat. I agree with what you said, but that infrastructure is very diverse and inconsistent. Is that being considered?
Absolutely. We will get into that just in 1 second. We will get into that and what we're doing in the program to get after where, if you will, the unique or uncommon infrastructure that exists out there in various agencies to support themselves. And we'll get into that in our approach to make sure we understand that we're compatible and in alignment with those various infrastructures also. Again, in the end, it's about being in alignment and compatible with the state's infrastructure. So that means everyone in the state. Yes, sir. Question in the room in the back, right behind you.
Yeah, this is Paul Anija from DFW. So we understand the process that has been taken to initially, go and gather the requirements from WATEC and OCS. But it is also very well known that we as a state are not as advanced in our use of cloud services and cloud computing in particular, which is what this whole project is all about. So there is a concern out there that by focusing on the requirements that are not based on what the modern tools and industries focus on at this point, that we may be, overly complicating a set of constraints that are really not suitable at this point in what we really need as a new set of tools.
Okay.
And this has come up many times in our statewide architecture committee as well.
No, I appreciate those comments. So the question is in their approach, when we were interviewing WATEC and talking to OCS, are we looking forward, if you will? Is that, I guess, is the program looking forward to talk about requirements today? Would that be the gist of your question?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. So, there are current constraints or current approaches that infrastructure teams and WATEC and OCS is very familiar with, but that misses, a whole lot of future things that most of the things that we really need to be looking at, especially for tools and technologies which we are looking at in, One Washington, for example. No,
I appreciate the comment. So so WATEC was not the only source of information. They were really about, again, back to the alignment and compatibility. While if we are not going to, the day that we bring on the ERP, we are still going to have a lot of legacy systems. We're going to have a lot of legacy users that come in via remote client access methods. And we're going to get into that a little bit. So we will not be able to, the day that we move to the ERP, basically forget about the state's legacy architecture. So we're still going to have to be compatible. So a lot of talking with WATEC is to ensure that we understand that architecture. When we talk to some of the other agencies to understand, we've had one interview session so far, and we learned some specifics about their architecture. It was important for us, again, the ERP, will it be compatible with that? Because there's going to be some systems that will never, when I say systems, I'm referring to business systems. I'm referring to how agencies get their job done, those unique systems that sit out there in the agencies. Not every business system will migrate to the ERP. Those systems will be around, so we have to ensure that the ERP is able to integrate with those systems. So a lot of the understanding of the architecture, or the infrastructure, if you will allows us to ensure that as we move over and we migrate, and there's a whole process for that we're sure that, again, back to alignment and compatibility. So hopefully I answered your question. If not, I can, but there are other sources we used about what should we look like, what's considered modern, what should an ERP look like, what does cloud services look like, what does the network that supports those cloud services look like. We have absolutely went down those roads and asked those questions about how do we get there from a program perspective. At the end of the day, when we go out for a solicitation, what the proposal that comes back from the ERP is really, it's got to meet all of the state's concerns, all of the state's capabilities. So even if there are some legacy systems out there that we have to integrate to. So in the end, our hope is with this technical process review that we will have the right requirements identified, that when they do propose a solution back, that it will not only, put us on a great trajectory forward to be modern, continue to modernize, but also to integrate well with the legacy systems. Hopefully that answers your question, sir. If not, we could talk afterwards. Okay, thanks. Are there any other questions about the approach? So I want to make sure, again, this is a dialogue between the program on the technical side, and really I'm talking to CIOs in a lot of cases, business apps personnel, network access folks, and cybersecurity and enterprise services. So this is your opportunity. I hope we all had time to look at the technical specs as part of your homework assignment before. At least you have an idea of how we put them together. If not, I'll show you where those are at. If you don't know what One Washington is and you got the email this morning, hey, you got to go to this meeting, that's okay too. We need your feedback also. We can talk after the meeting or after the discussion about One Washington a little bit more. Okay, so silence me is consent, so let's keep going. So where are we at today with this? Today we're at a point where we feel we're at a point in the review process that we have a product, a set of technical specifications. Like I said, there are about 566, where we can bring them to the agencies and say, hey, we want you to take a look at these now. Did we get this right up to this point with the current product we have, going through the checks that we did by utilizing those two agencies, OCS and WATEC, to get there? In the case where your services are not provided by WATEC, we have already reached out to one agency, that was Washington State Patrol, began a discussion with them. Washington State Department of Transportation, I believe they have a new CIO. I definitely want to meet that person, and they have their technical person. That's who we'll be reaching out to next. When you get to like legislature and courts, we're also going to reach out to them. Anybody who does not receive WATEC services, we'll be reaching out to you to make sure that, again, the technical spaces are in alignment with your infrastructure. And so we want to capture those changes or any comments you have. And then finally, if you look at the date that we have there, and we're still on military time. I don't know how we got there, but I'm former military, and they still, if you look at 16 November, that's how we do it. I have to crack a joke on myself. I cannot stop doing that. But that's supposed to be November 16th, if you were confused. That's November 16th. But we want to solicit, especially when you go back to your agencies, take a look at the technical specifications. If you want to have additions, changes, deletions, you just have questions on what we wrote. By November 16th, please provide those comments back to the One Washington email link. If you don't have that email link, we'll show you at the end of it, but please provide those comments back. Those are very important to us. Why November 16th? Well, we're going to determine at that point from a program perspective, depending on how many, and I'll just define this quickly, whether it's a common or unique technical specification. What's common and unique? Some of you out here, you participated in the work stream or the business side technical workshops. In those, we define a common capability as something consistent across the state, all state agencies, and we describe unique as something that's governed by a law, a policy, in some cases best practice. And so don't worry about if it's a common or unique. We just want to get what you think is not there, additions, deletions, refinement, changes in the wording back to us by November 16th. At that point, we'll make a decision on do we have enough unique type that are governed by laws, policy. I say best practice because what we found is in a lot of ADA type issues that what I listened to in the program was really what's the best practice? What ought we be doing in the state? What should we be doing in the area of disability for the state? So I made those a part of really a special point to make sure we reach out and do what we should do. But it's not necessarily a law, a state or federal or mandated law. So please, by November 16th. So what we'll determine after that point, sometime in December, do we need to have another session more like the workshops where we come in, we have, we go through more maybe a process. We go through where we have boards out and you have little sticky notes you write down on your comments. and we go through a question and answering period. We'll make that determination at some point, and we'll come back in this forum. So more to be followed. So, but the process right now that we're going to take is we want to get that initial feedback from you via this process, via the One Washington email link, and then we'll make that determination in early December on should we have another session like this, but more of a workshop session. So again, I want to pause there to make sure we don't have any questions again on the approach. Again, dialogue. I want to talk to CIOs and important SMEs out there in the community. Okay, no questions heard. So finally, user stories, use cases. What this really is, we're going to give the vendor an opportunity to come in and demo a certain aspect of the system. This is really important for our work streams or business teams. But for the technical specifications, we will have some use cases. Think of it like this. We'll ask the vendor to come in, show us how you produce a certain audit log for a 1 month period on how many people logged into the system. So just picking something random here. And we'll ask the vendor, he will demonstrate how the system would do that, if you will. That would be a very general technical, one of our technical specifications we currently ask for. So, and we'll be participating in also. So from a timeline perspective, that user storage use cases will begin. We'll be doing that starting in January timeframe up through February. Then from a program perspective, sometime in, I would say, early March. Becky, you can jump in here at this point if you'd like. I'm sorry. Becky is our contracting expert at this. She'll be guiding us through the process for the program. But at that point, the program, we will all go in some secluded cave somewhere, and we will be locked in. Kind of like how they do, used to do astronauts in the 60s to make sure you can stay up in space. We're going to get locked in by Becky. We're going to go underground, and we're going to come out about maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, and we're going to have this finished product called an RFP that will be out on the street. So if you don't hear from us in March and the April timeframe, that's where we are. We're locked in there under Becky's guidance. So that's roughly the timeline. I spoke earlier. I'm going to take you up to the end, really the edge of the RFP when we start that, and that's really from a technical specifications. Really, I would say January, really at the latest, would be really your final opportunity to look at the technical specifications. If you don't know where those are located and how you can look at those, make sure you talk to me again or send that question in. We're not provided that to date. We did set a lot of our communications go out to the CFOs and CIOs. So as you get down to, down the chain of command, if you will, I'm not sure if everybody gets the information, but please ask and we'll make sure you know where those technical specifications are located. And these are the active ones, the working population of technical specifications. Okay, I'll briefly pause there as I transition to the next slide to see if there's any questions. As Matt Stevens says, he says he gets paid by the word. Those of you who know Matt Stevens, I don't know. I might be working towards that payment system today. But so just quickly, the technical, really what these definitions do for, I want to just explain to you how we wrote them. In the technical specs, they are written along 4 different lines. If you see a technical spec written as like a system must or the system shall, think mandatory. Don't worry if it's scored or not. Just think mandatory. Again, policy, laws, best practices. That's why we wrote it that way. If you see it written as the ability of the system, the ability of the user, we have not determined yet if it's a mandatory requirement or a desirable. Again, don't worry about scored or not. But we haven't determined that at this point, and we'll do that again as we move closer to the RFP. But again, this is examples of why we wrote them this way. You might ask, though, again, those who sat in some of the other workshops, why are we a little bit different? It was clear when we started from the technical side, there are clearly mandatory technical specifications that we must meet to meet OCIO policies or some other rules or laws. So again, like just for example, we took disaster recovery. There are certain things we had to do. And it kind of created a little bit of tension to write them any other way. So we just went with, let's write them in a mandatory sense now. But again, don't worry about that too much from the program perspective. Just get your comments, again, additions, deletions, and how you want to shape the current technical specification. That's what's important. So I'd like to move on to the reference architecture. We're almost there. And yeah, I said 15 minutes, so I'm a little bit over. I apologize. So the reference architectures are really a point to start a conversation not only with the vendor, but also with the state agencies. What I found when I arrived at the state, that everybody has their own understanding of what the state's architecture is, what the state's infrastructure is, if you will. So we use these as a point to discuss certain topics. Again, these are broad and vague on purpose. We did not want to give, obviously, some adversary an attack vector at the state's network. So when you think network access, up in the upper left-hand corner there, when you think broadband internet access, think Starbucks, think you're at home teleworking, think maybe you're using your phone as an access device for broadband internet access. When you think in the far left-hand corner there in orange, you think local state government, think of a school district or a university provides their own internet services. And when you think state government network provided network, again, connectivity, just think of you really are your services, whether they're network, wherever those network services are in the state, that they're provided by WATech for the most part. And what we felt is whether you're a SAW client or a remote client, but we felt that everybody falls somewhere into one of those categories. And if we did not get this right, this is a perfect opportunity, especially when you get to like legislature or courts. Let's make sure we understand how, if you think we did not capture everybody in the state. And again, this is how you would get to a future SaaS ERP, the network connectivity. On the bottom right there, access methods. These are just some of the ways that the vendor could propose. Oh, sorry, I do have a question.
Would you please define what remote clients means at the bottom of that screen?
So my understanding, again, in our interviews, that you come in, if you're a user at home and you want to be enabled, let's say mutual factor, you want to have like your mutual factor authentication capabilities of single sign-on, you come in through a VPN. That's part of your laptop when it's installed. I think we use Big 5 in the state. And then you come in through a VPN. At that point, you have the same services as if you were at your workstation, if you will, logged in to the state's network. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. And we have various SMEs here who can correct me if I don't get this right. So access methods, again, these are just a list of what a vendor might propose back to us. These are various methods. This is not that this one method is better than another. It's just it's just a list of methods that the vendor can use to propose things back to us. There's other methods than this. When we take back to the gentleman's question here, when you think about moving forward and what's modern with SaaS ERPs, industry is very big on software-defined networks, software-defined WAN connectivity, because that gives you the most flexibility. But maybe for the states, for the vast majority of the state's infrastructure, maybe we're not ready to go to that today. So what would be given what we do have in the state's infrastructure, what would be the best proposal from that vendor? So, but we are thinking modern. These things are out there. We're trying to engage the vendor, give us the best proposal back in the area of network connectivity. So I'll pause there for a second just to see if there are any questions. Any on Skype? All right, so moving on. So authentication. This is probably the most important one of the reference architectures. So there are rules that we have set out by OCIO policy, specifically 14110 in this case, where we have to follow in the areas of authentication. For this program, if we think modern, if we think of the security risk that we take with a modern ERP system, some of the older ways with maybe managed accounts, some of the older ways that we allow people to access if it's AFRS or HRMS today, are not going to be really allowed moving towards the future system. The security risks from a program perspective are too big. So some of the things we're asking for are going to be, you have a authentication and identity service provider. What is that? What does a service mean? That means, if you have Active Directory performing that service, you log into your computer every day with a login and password. Active Directory authenticates you. Yes, we know who this person is. He has a certain set of, he has authority given against his name, if you will, whatever his role is. We can assign him in the future ERP certain roles that he can approve whatever up to the level that we gave him. So, and this is why that's important. The ERP is going to be based on a lot of roles and how we define those roles. That is done probably during your onboarding process. So again, you need an authentication service and identity provider as a must. Now, I'm sorry, Matt would say it also. In the state, we use single sign-on SAML as the preferred method. There are other ways, but it must be some type of single sign-on capability. If you're having any questions on what that is, then we can quickly go off tangent and talk about that. But just quickly, up in there, I want to describe what the diagram says here. If you look at the State Enterprise Active Directory, again, think WATEC. WATEC provides your Enterprise Active Directory services. When you sign in to, let's say, in this building, we're in OFM, WATEC is our service provider. I log in every day. I have my single sign-on SAML. I'm authenticated to the network. What can I do with that? I have been given I've met the mutual factor authentication rules set out again in 141.10, and now I can access Category 3 and above data. But again, I'm behind the State's Enterprise Active Directory. I'm meeting the burden that OCS has set out for me. Again, if you're a remote client logged in or SAL, you also have that same capability when you come in via those access methods. But let's say if you're up in you're an agency up in that upper left-hand corner there in orange. You own your own force, you run your own enterprise, but you have a trust back with the state. Again, we have an authoritative identity and authentication service provider with the state. Because of that trust you have back, again, again, your user logs on, even though he's on your force, he's still given that mutual factor authentication. He meets, again, the state's burden, or the state's regulations, in this case, OCIO policy 141.10. You meet that by having that trust back with the state. But then the final one, and these are the ones where we're interviewing these agencies out there that fall in this category. If you own your own force, you own your own Enterprise Active Directory, and you do not have a trust back to the state, then it is incumbent upon you that you meet the requirements set out by, again, authentication and identity service provider. That you have some type of single sign-on capability, preferably SAML. There are other methods. And again, while we have used managed accounts to allow, if you will, to get around this, moving to the ERP, there's too big a security risk at this point to allow us to continue. Now, this is not happening tomorrow. If you look at the implementation timeline, you have years to get there. And in one agency's case, we're trying to work with them at maybe a plan or at least in some cases help them by working with WATEC or other agencies on how they can get there. But again, let's be clear, these are the security requirements to use the ERP system. So I will pause there because I said a lot, and just to make sure there are not any questions. And there are smarter people than me on this in the audience or on Skype who can clarify anything about this if necessary. Okay. So the last reference architecture here, when you think integrations, again, there's an entire implementations and integration portion to this program. And we're actually, just to give you a little bit of what's coming up, right now it's tentatively scheduled for November 27th. We're going to have actually an integrations and implementation discussion. Again, this similar format, we're actually putting this together right now, and we'll talk about what more generally happens during this phase of the program. But when you think integrations, a lot of the ways that you guys do things now, think in agencies, think what do you need to get to AFRS overnight? There are a lot of the batch files. I think we push at 10 o'clock every night, and you guys put all your files, and then they get moved over into AFRS and at some point during the night. That's the current way you do it. But think about the way we want to move data now to this ERP is think either near real time or real time. A lot of things the old way of doing things will change. So just think through that when we get back to modern again, sir. There's not a lot of batch things necessarily. I know I hear a lot of comments from agencies, but this is how we do it today. Think about how we should do it. When you get to the areas of as far as HRS payroll, some of your HR type issues, a lot of these, obviously, when it gets close to the 10th and the 25th, we want real-time systems to send information. So we don't want a batch file. So again, think in those areas, and then this is really what this, again, for the vendor, again, these are just examples of data transfer methods and the ways to do it. So again, we're looking for the vendor to give us that proposal back that allows the best possible approach for, the best possible approach or implementation for the state. And this is what this slide, again, tries to do. So that's the last really of the formal part of the briefing. And this is the OneWA, how to contact us. And before I go into questions, there's our website, and if you need a little bit more information as far as what the program is, as far as the work streams, really what is he talking about, what's an ERP, if you have no idea what I was saying up here today, if you would like to give negative comments about the presenter, this is where you do it. Hopefully everything was good this day. And there's our email link also. So I will, as I said I did in the onset, I want to give those who are dialed in today an opportunity to ask questions. So at this time, you can unmute yourself if you have a question. We'll see how this goes. We'll see how the queuing system works, but please ask your question. Sorry, we're giving the dial-in people a second to ask their questions first.
It's okay.
1 second, sir, sorry. Hey, silence is heard from the dial-in audience, so we'll move on to anybody in person or in Skype. Yes, sir.
So this supposes that there's going to be a strong API into the software as a service cloud solution. Do you have any more information? Has there been any set of technical specifications for those APIs? How are you developing those? And I mean, there's a number of considerations for that.
As far as an individual API, no. Are we defining what the API should do, its function? Does a vendor are we going to need some type of API possibly to bridge a gap, if you will? Yes. Are we defining individually at this point in the program? No. And I will pause. I was going to look for Jeff there as far as implementation and integration, but this is what Jeff was, he's one of our strategic partners. He might be able to get a little bit more information about when we get into that portion where we start looking at, once we would have selected an ERP vendor, and we'd be looking at bridging that gap with what an API would do.
So there's a couple of aspects of that are going to be important to us, I believe. You know, one is API that allows the functionality to do financial transactions in and out of the system, right? And I'm expecting those to be fairly standard. We're also going to need to have APIs to be able to pull data, query data, and pull data in a number of different ways. And perhaps a third aspect is going to be some sort of data analytical capabilities to be able to access the financial data to pull out, business intelligence kind of data and things of that nature. I would expect that the technical requirements would need to cover those aspects of those systems. I'm guessing that the functional requirements are going to identify how the behavior of how the APIs work, but there's some technical aspects of those that I believe are going to need to be addressed.
And that was our goal. I appreciate the question, sir. And that was our goal with the technical specifications. While we looked at, for an API, if you feel an API is necessary in some area, and you identified several, that API that's going to be used, it needs to meet a certain burden, or it needs, and I say I use gap, because it needs to bridge that gap. Do we define to the level, the specificity you're using? No, not at this point. Because again, in defining the technical specifications, our goal is to really, at the end state, is to just select the ERP at this point. There is a point where we get into more of the details, when we get into more implementations and integrations again. And it may be a great question that we save to when we have that briefing of where we'll get into more of your detail of your question. But this part of the process for us in technical specifications, it's really about defining the functionality, defining the capabilities we want the system to do so we can select that ERP vendors. Every ERP vendor is different, and how they do business is different. So until we select that vendor, and the vendor's on the ground working with us to integrate, to implement, where we're designing or developing those APIs for some function, it's really hard at this point to say more, again, to really get into the details of it. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer at this time. I go out wider to the wider One Washington program if, yeah. Hey Jeff, I'm gonna throw one back there at you. The question is, if in the areas of when you get into the details of an API, on the various function an API would do, the question is, and if I don't say this right, sir, that is in the technical specifications, I believe at this point it's more about defining technical specifications so we can pick that ERP. We would define that an API will be necessary to do certain functions, but in picking the ERP, not at this phase, we're really not there yet. About when you get into the details of what the API would do, that's more of an integrations and conversions question, or at that point we would get into that with once we select an ERP vendor. If I'm not giving you a question, sir, I have our expert here.
Ask the question again.
Ask the question.
What was your question, so I can just address that?
When I look at your architecture, I see network, I see, infrastructure and other things. The key thing that we're going to be interacting with we're expecting a rich, robust set of APIs in and out of your cloud environment. We're going to need APIs to support financial transactions, whether it be payroll, accounts receivable, accounts payable, AFRs, traditional AFRs. We're also going to need to have robust query capability to get access to data, as well as business intelligence and aggregation, et cetera. I didn't see anything in the architecture that really addressed that. And to me, that's a significant technical component that needs to be addressed. I understand that the details will have to be addressed with the vendor as they occur. It seems to me there's a component lacking here to support APIs from the state perspective and the technical specifications for how that would interact with this.
Yeah, good question. Let me address APIs first of all. And each of the modules of functionality that we've gone through capabilities, there are descriptions or capabilities that describe the ability to integrate to external systems and move transactions in and out. The APIs that each of these applications deliver are really focused, A, on a standard protocol, and then B, standard record structure inside of the functionality that exists in each of the areas of financial capabilities that you're buying. Each of these vendors have standard APIs that are already defined. So there's a way to move information into and out of the system. And each application has one to n number of APIs predefined. So that should be in each of the modules. It doesn't hurt to put one here in the tech specs that says something about standard APIs predefined in the application. So I think that's a good point. Second of all, query ability, that's out there in every single module as a capability, must be able to query information from the system in multiple manners. And then you had a third point, which was BI, right? And there was a whole BI session that has a set of capabilities out there as well. So I would encourage you to read those once they're posted, and if you believe something's missing, I think you should get that back to SHEP to be added. Does that not answer your question? Okay.
There's a request online that when a question is put out there, if you can state who you are. I have a couple more here. With regards to security controls, reporting and auditing, I see NIST called out in the tech specs. What about what IRS, CGIS, PCI, et cetera, controls? Thank you. This is from Paul Cox.
So I know we do call out, we have at least 2 technical specifications that specifically address PCI issues. Is there anything specific about that? Or I'd invite them to send in a comment again, did we get that about PCI correct? Or what would be, how would we refine that particular technical specification?
Okay, he says he sees NIST, but doesn't see anything about IRS, CJIS, or PCI in the text right now.
Okay. Hi, Shep. This is Matt Stevens. I could see if I could follow up with that a little bit. I would ask Paul Cox and the rest of the community for clarity on their requirements as far as hosting CGIS data in an ERP, FTI data in the ERP, or any PCI data in the ERP. Is there a requirement from DSHS or other agencies to extend their 1075 boundary into the ERP and host actual FTI data that's covered by the federal guidelines? Is there a requirement to put criminal history information in the ERP? I think that those things would need to be well known and called out so that we'll say well established, so that SHEP and the team can make sure that they're aware of those requirements from agencies and determine if the system is appropriate for those types of workloads.
So Paul, I think we're going to have to reach out to you offline and really we had to dig into this question a little bit deeper. It sounds like you have some great requirements that we could add to the technical specs. So.
Okay, next one is Cameron McGee. Suggest adding the OCIO API guidelines to the text.
OCIO
And
API guidelines.
Didn't see a technical requirement for system ability or downtime. There is an RTO requirement, but I didn't see anything of high ability related to uptime 99.99.
I will just say go back. Right now we are at 3 nines on purpose. Again, we're looking at cost here. That should be under system architecture, the category. We're at 3 nines right now, and if that is not a high enough availability, then that's where I need agencies to come back and tell me why we need to go to a 4 nines or higher. Because again, there's a cost to that. And given the interviews I have taken on, if we lose a system, again, that's 3 nines, I believe is what, 8 hours a year is what that ends up being. So it's 8 hours over an entire year that you would be down. So if we would need to get that down on the 4 nines, which I think gets you in like 1 hour a year, we need somebody to articulate why. Again, I think it gets more expensive as you get closer to. So we're doing this based on the state's requirements.
Yeah. Hi, this is Cameron. 4 nines was just an example. I didn't see any reference. I looked through the system architecture requirements and business continuity. I just didn't see any reference to system availability or high availability.
If you have them open, just take a look under system architecture, the yellow tab. Look in there for availability. It should be in there. If it's not, then I'm going to direct you to the modern, the most updated version. You have 5.3 is what we sent out. That was 3 weeks ago. There is a version 5.4. It could be possible that we did not have that in the older version.
Okay.
And I apologize for that. We'll make sure you get the location of the current version.
All right. Thanks, Anthony.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate the question.
Is that information out on the box yet?
Not in the box. Okay. No, it's not. We'll add it. Okay. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Yes, ma'am. Right in the back there.
What was the date for the integrations work group meeting in November?
It's tentatively scheduled right now for 27 November. That is not finalized. We will get a meeting invite out, as we always do with these, if it changes. But tentatively right now, it's 27 November in the afternoon. Right here in the front.
So this is Terry Lance from Department of Transportation.
Conservation Office. Are there any specifications for the state's real estate assets, such as the Department of Natural Resources or Fish and Wildlife? RCOs fund the acquisition of a lot of state lands, and want to see if there's any component related to that.
For as far as technical specifications?
Right.
I will give a quick answer is, if we look at technical specs, we look at all agencies. We did not specifically, unless there's something unique about your agency, we did not specifically address anything on your agency. I'll throw a net out to my peers out there.
Under the business intelligence, we do have GIS capabilities. You could look through those. Those are out on the box. And if what you're looking for is not there, let me know, and we'll get a map.
I think we had a question on Skype or on the dial-in. silence? Okay. Yes, sir. In the back there.
Paul Oneja, DFW. So are there any specific technical requirements that have been added so far about the service-oriented architecture or the use of web services to share and exchange data, which is fairly common practice at this point, moving away from, in your examples, there was a use of MQ services, for example, which was quite outdated, for example.
Yeah, the reason why you see that in there, because that's currently what we use in the state. Again, the whole legacy piece. Do we call out to use service-oriented architecture in asking the vendor on what he's going to propose? Yes. Do we get into specifics about what that proposal looks like outside of, again, the functionality, what the technical specification should do? In the work streams, again, the ability of the system too. We don't get any more detailed than just that, because we want the vendor to propose something back to us that's new and modern. We do not want to, the more technical specifications you guys have been through RFPs before, the more you say, if you will, the more you pigeonhole that vendor to provide you a solution. And the more you pigeonhole the number of vendors who can provide you a solution. So while we do call out for or ask for vendors to look at that in those areas, we didn't get, I wouldn't say extremely detailed about it. Does that answer your question? Anything to add to that? Or?
Well, we do have capabilities that say the ability to, provide soap or whatever.
Are there any more questions? Any on Skype? We'll pause here a few more seconds here. Hey, so again, I hope you had fun. I had fun up here. If you didn't notice, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity as a program to talk with you and dialogue with you. Again, we're at a point again where we need your support and help to be successful. So please go to the One Washington email, providing again additions, deletions, any suggestions. Please go to the One Washington link. If you have any more information you require, please go to the website. If something didn't get answered or you don't feel comfortable grabbing a mic today and asking it, please send it into the website, or you can send it to me directly even if you want to. But please get those comments back to us. We're going to be successful because you helped us be successful, if that makes sense. So, and with that, again, I say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in the future at future events. Thank you.